So folks, I know a lot of you know us, but I want to share the Willamette Partnership and Center for Sustainable Infrastructure have really developed this approach because we believe that getting to more equitable, healthier, and stronger communities will, as Ted said, require just a totally new approach to infrastructure that makes our communities work better. And so um, although we are here to provide you with the training, I also want to provide an offer of sort of reciprocity and exchange and provide a little bit more background before I dive into the model here, just of what we're hoping to achieve for all of us within the next day and a half here that we'll be together. So we've just realized that with our small teams, there's just a limit to how much technical assistance we can actually get out on the ground. We love working with individual local communities. We also love helping resolve state and federal level policy challenges that our local partners work with. But we really want to share what we know with you all, regardless of whether you're with a nonprofit or in the government sector at various levels or elsewhere, so that you can pick up whatever resonates with you or is useful and bring it to your own role and work. So we're kind of taking stuff that we might normally call intellectual property and sharing it with you because we feel like it's really important. We want to see it spread throughout the world in a way that our organizations can't do by ourselves. And the other side of that handshake is we also know there's just a ton missing. There's a ton we don't know. There's a ton we don't even know that we don't know. And so this training is also us extending an invitation for you to provide feedback and share your own knowledge and experience with us. We'd encourage you to continue to drop ideas in the chat, to raise your hand, to talk, to share, and to provide us with feedback both throughout, and then there'll be an evaluation form available after our training, where we just encourage you to provide us feedback that we can use to help make this model better and make it easier and more compelling to spread. So we want to continue to co-create this work together in a way that's really mutually beneficial. And our hope is that it'll take off and start getting even kind of invisibly integrated into the normal ways of doing business. And it sounds like there's a lot of shared interest in the concept and the motivation behind this approach. So we're really excited to have this group help us do that to the extent that it meets your needs and fits in with your work. We definitely don't need our brand or our organizations to be front and center in spreading this approach. So Lenny, if you can go to the next slide. We're going to share a little visual here that'll help us stay oriented, I think, throughout the conversations we'll have over the next couple of days. And we call this our InfrastructureNext conceptual model. This is the really bare bones version, which is like the way that we see the universe of infrastructure planning as it works right now. So it probably looks familiar in some form to what a lot of you do in your day-to-day lives. When we're planning and implementing infrastructure approaches, we go through some kind of a pre-design or planning phase. I have had colleagues in the public sector tell me that this is a little bit of an idealized model, and that phase is often so light as to be invisible, and actually people start noticing infrastructure planning at the second circle, not at the first. But it's our aspiration to continue to build around that first circle. The second circle there is design and engineering, and folks will be familiar with this part where often, even as public entities, we kind of hand things off to a consultant and say, tell us how to solve this infrastructure challenge or problem or dilemma. And they come back with the design, and then we have to figure out how to implement it. The third circle is that build implementation phase. We know that the way that this has traditionally been implemented kind of tends to lead to single issue solutions. You come in with a problem, you ask an engineer for a solution to that problem, and then they hand you something that hopefully you can implement, although sometimes it doesn't work as well. And so I'd be interested to hear from folks in chat or throughout here whether this reflects what you perceive as the reality of the way this system works. Lenny, can you go to the next slide? What we're envisioning and what we're calling InfrastructureNext, and the way that we provide technical assistance to communities in negotiating these infrastructure planning and implementation cycles, there are kind of these three intervention points. And it's a friendly intervention, right? The goal is to be supportive. The goal is to help, whether it's local governments or communities or nonprofits that have some involvement in infrastructure planning, to help sort of open up the breathability of this cycle with these particular intervention points. So the first one, Lenny, if you can go to the next slide, is even before we get to this pre-design and planning phase, there's an opportunity to do community engagement and visioning in a way that will create some more robust solutions. And so this is the first intervention point that we see is almost before the process as we all imagine it now. So there's an opportunity to really understand a broader diversity of immediate, and I would also say actually long-term infrastructure needs, zoom out a little bit, and the CSI team will talk to us quite a bit about that over the next few days. There's an opportunity to step back and look at community capacity and early funding sources. So a lot of times we run into folks late in the implementation phase when they realize they don't have either the community support or the staff capacity or the financial capacity to fully implement and then maintain the systems that they've been exploring that were designed sort of mid-process. And there's also an opportunity, which we'll talk about later, to use a more collaborative approach and to be able to bring multiple public and private and nonprofit sector folks together to really build a shared motivation among diverse stakeholders and find a way to work towards joint action. So we have some models to show about in day 2 about ways of engaging and working around that. Go ahead, Lenny. There's a second intervention point that we're really excited about, and this is work that Andrea Ramage and Center for Sustainable Infrastructure have really developed very thoughtfully, and we're excited to walk you through the second half of today's session and the first half of tomorrow's session, a lot more detail on what this step looks like. So there's this thing that we call value planning that kind of sits in between that visioning and pre-design phase and the design and engineering phase. And Lenny, if you can go to the next slide, the idea behind value planning, and again, we'll go into a ton more depth on this, is really to step back and say, okay, what are our values? What are our assets? What are our needs and wants as a community? Bring in a broader diversity of folks than we're used to involving in those conversations, and really explore a wider range of solutions based on what we're hearing from the community. So it's really a community-led, or it can be a community-led, community-driven process, whether you define that community as being let's say, a diversity of folks within the city of Portland's bureaus, or whether you really define that as being folks from, individual residents or commercial, commercial land developers or what have you in the community. Whoever the community is, there's an opportunity for us to sit down and talk about values before we drop ourselves into that design stage and get centered in on a single solution set. So Ted and Andrea will talk a great deal more about that over the next few days. And that's really, our CSI team's wheelhouse. The Willamette Partnership team, in addition to really helping folks do more robust community engagement and visioning at the front end, we really tend to specialize in what we call special implementation support. And sometimes, this can be where we start. This is our original entry point, is when a community starts to develop a sort of single sector, single silo solution, and then says, actually, this isn't implementable. This doesn't have community support. It's hitting some policy challenges. We've hit a rough spot with funding. Maybe we need to zoom back out and figure out how we can do this. Our ideal way of doing it, of course, is to say, hey, we actually thought this through from the beginning, and we just need some help navigating some challenges here. So that special implementation support could look like anything from us helping a local government develop an RFP that really supports a more innovative solution set, helping folks connect with engineers that bring a more multi-sector approach, overcoming some of those institutional challenges, and helping build the collaborative groups that are needed to develop and implement them. So those are the 3 intervention points we'll be talking about over the next day or 2 here. Lenny, if you can flip forward, I believe that's, yeah. And I think one thing we wanted to be sure to call out before I hand it back to Lenny to dive in a little deeper on the first community engagement and visioning intervention there, is just the question of scale. And, do you have to have a big, robust, soup to nuts community engagement and stakeholder process in order to apply this model? And I hope you'll see as we continue to talk in more detail here, these are concepts and models and tools that can be applied virtually for any scale of infrastructure planning process and at any point in the infrastructure planning process. So we really like to think that at any point, no matter what we're talking about, what kind of infrastructure, what kind of process, we have an opportunity to bring in a supportive and friendly intervention that gets folks to zoom out a little bit and start looking at a broader world of more integrated solutions. So I'd encourage folks to continue to think as we talk here about how we could apply this to different infrastructure challenges in our community. If it's not even started yet, or if it's halfway down the pike, there's a lot here that I hope folks will find useful to begin with. I think that folks, just from our initial conversation, are probably pretty sold on the idea that it's a good idea to think about multiple sectors and multiple benefits in different sectors when we do infrastructure planning and implementation. So I'll just go through these at a really high level, and folks are welcome to revisit these and contest or agree. Some of the benefits of these interventions that we've seen are, we just have higher value solutions that serve more people, more value, more needs, and they really go beyond financial value. So we're not just looking at costs in a single category of benefits. We're looking at a lot of different kinds of value and a lot of different kinds of benefit. And that really helps us integrate across public health, environment, economic sectors in a way that builds community and builds solutions that support our communities. Go ahead, Lenny. We find that folks who use some of these interventions tend to get broader and deeper support from community stakeholders and from funding agencies. And we'll share some interesting tools for being able to bring both the community and the funding community into these conversations in a way that helps make that a reality. And at the end of the day, we really find that folks who go through these kinds of processes and really take some time to explore multi-sector solutions tend to have more success in funding and implementing them. When we do hit the rocks, when we get to the kind of whitewatery part of our infrastructure planning process and implementation process, you got more people in the boat and you've got more visions to help guide. And so if we do hit funding or policy challenges, the more people are bought into kind of one of these integrated visions of infrastructure that serves our communities in multiple ways, the more we're able to navigate those rapids and come out the other end with something we can actually implement.